Hello, everyone. It's your boy East Brave, and welcome back to the Passion Project. Before we begin, I'd like to take a quick second to clear up any confusion. This channel isn't a podcast. We strictly review podcasts that we love listening to. And we listen to a whole lot of podcasts, and I'm very passionate about this hobby. So rest assured, this is your most trusted source. I'm not here to make any friends. I'm simply here to tell the truth. And I support this message. Now that we got that out of the way, another thing is I like to apologize for our inconsistency of the quality of our previous video. We figured out the issue and it was only a minor lighting issue. So moving forward, I hope it will be smooth sailing. If you are new to the channel, like and subscribe, but more importantly, don't forget to watch and share our videos because it will help us out a whole lot with our algorithms. All right, let's kill the intro and let's get into today's episode. This is part 2 of our previous video. Let us do a quick recap, shall we? In part 1, we reviewed season 1, 2, and 3 of Salvador Gravano's podcast, also known by his professional name, Sammy the Bull. He was the underboss of the Gambino crime family. Together with John Gotti, they ruled New York City's underworld with an iron fist in the late 80s, right up until they got indicted on a RICO case in 1990. If you have already watched part 1, then you don't need any further introduction on Sammy. However, if you haven't watched it, I do recommend that you head over there right now to watch it and come back here for part 2. So to wrap up this podcast that we will be reviewing today, we'll be getting into part 2, where we will be reviewing season 4 and 5. Before we get into it, I like to give a quick disclaimer. When listening to Sammy's podcast and today's episode, know that it will contain very descriptive violent material, strong language, and adult themes which may be unsuitable for younger audiences. And I'll try to keep it as PG-13 the best I can. With all things considered, choose how and when you'll listen. Now, let me be the first to tell you that season 4 and 5 were overwhelming with content. This was a big season and a lot to get through. So yeah, we do have a lot of grounds to cover. Right off the bat, I feel like Sammy could have created a season 6. Why he chose to condense everything into season 4 and 5 is beyond my understanding, but that's where we are. There were moments where I felt like it was very repetitive. So as such, you do need to listen to 3 episodes a day, probably 4 days a week, and spread them out over several weeks just to get through them all. Now, the stories were great, but the amount of content can be grueling and daunting at times. Therefore, you need to approach this like as if there was a season 6. Now, in season 4, there are 10 main episodes, which fits the theme from season 1, 2, and 3. Now, I have introduced you all to Sammy's new segment, which he added in season 3. That segment is called Fireside with the Underboss. That segment has a total of 34 episodes. So, for season 4, that is the total of 44 episodes. So, this is much bigger compared to its previous season. Although some of the segments are shorter in length, there are a few segments that go a bit longer. And that leaves us with season 5, where we get only 5 main episodes. You also get 1 special edition along with your 26th Fireside with the Underboss episode. So that tallies to about 32 episodes for season 5. In season 4, the first episode was aired on February the 14th, 2022. And the last episode was aired on the 23rd of June, 2022. Now, in season 5, the first episode was aired on June 24th, 2022, and the last episode was aired on the 13th of February, 2023. They are all available right now on Spotify with ad breaks or wherever you get your podcast on all streaming services. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of season 4 and 5. Season 4 was about the RICO indictment. I mentioned in my previous video that the RICO law was initially created to go after the mafia. Most gangsters are petrified by this law because this law has a 98% conviction rate. In simple terms, if you ever get caught up in a RICO case, just know that your prayers will fall on deaf ears because God can't help you. So may God help you. In season 4, Sammy walks us through when the feds came to dismantle the Gambino crime family on December the 12th, 1990. That was when Sammy heard for the first time of John Gotti talking recklessly on those tapes that were used in the indictment. This indictment became prosecution proof after collecting thousands of hours of audio surveillance on the family. Now, in season 5, we get to hear about Sammy's life after when the trial was over and his time spent behind the wall. We also get to hear about his life after prison. Now, the stories of him in the streets were usually filled with a lot of action and suspense, but the stories he told while he was serving his sentence were intriguing and thought provoking, but they are more laid back. But needless to say, they were entertaining and there were some comedic moments. All right. Yeah, let's just get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's start with the good because we all love good news. Now, the first obvious thing I like about season 4 is the segment. In case you forgot, it's called Fireside with the Underboss. Let me tell you, they were amazing and I enjoyed it. Now, they were a little rocky in season 3 because I felt like they were trying something new, adding segments alongside your main episodes. Of course, the audience had to keep an open mind to accept this new change. But that was to be expected because new creations take time to take form. I'm extremely pleased that it had time to find its right footing in this podcast because once it caught traction, it really translated well through season 4. So nice job, Sammy, and to your team. Now, I was initially concerned that those segments were going to diminish the podcast, but I was wrong. It was a nice addition and it complemented the podcast. Another thing I love about season 4 is when Sammy became an informant. This is the worst thing you can do when you become a gangster. Being labeled a rat is the worst thing to be known for, but for years, Sammy never publicly spoke about why he testified against John Gotti. Before that, he was very well liked by the mafia and respected, also known for having such a squeaky clean and polished reputation in the streets. There was an interview done with Diana Sawyer after when he was released the first time from prison, but that interview was too well polished for TV. Therefore, he really couldn't get off what was on his mind. So for years, he kept his head down and he kept his story to himself until now. Because in season 4, he gets very personal with us. He tells all, step by step, how and what exactly happened, and more importantly, how he felt at the time, which led him up to doing what he did. Now, I have listened to his entire story, and in his account, uh, I guess the story really resonated with me and it struck a chord with me. I'm going on the record for this one. I'm not here to make friends. Again, I'm here to tell the truth because I'm a trusted source. I think what he did was wrong. When you take an oath in that lifestyle, you don't tell on another man for the sake of self preservation, just so that you can get a lenient sentence. But I can identify why he did it. I also can sympathize and empathize with him. And I'll tell you why later to close off this episode with a story of my own. But to sum things up for you, during his indictment, Sammy heard the tapes of John Gotti wilding out, talking recklessly, and even said a few things attempting to tarnish Sammy's name. Now, John Gotti was the leader of the family at the time, and he felt entitled to walk free. So, John instructed Sammy to take the fall. John and his lawyer were going to paint a narrative that Sammy was the monster. I digress. This is a fun fact. John's lawyer at the time backed out immediately after hearing the narrative that they were trying to paint to have Sammy locked up. Um, I want to commend the lawyer because not all money is good money. He refused to represent John because what he was paid to do went against his moral code of ethics. I like to clarify that they had 5,000 hours of audio surveillance on Sammy. The prosecutor ended up not being able to use any of it because he was never caught saying anything on those tapes that they can use to prosecute as evidence. Most of the tapes were used to prosecute everyone involved, including John Gotti, who was caught talking about illegal things. In fact, John Gotti was also caught revealing all the murders that Sammy did for the family. Let us revisit the previous season from part 1. Remember that Sammy plotted and meticulously planned the hit on Paul Castellano, who was the boss of all bosses at the time. Paul wanted John and his crew to perish because John and his crew were caught on tape for the same reason for this indictment. Now, during this time, Sammy was not part of John Gotti's crew, but because Sammy was involved in 3 mafia wars with 3 other families, they had to reach out to him to get him on board. Not only did Sammy save his life along with his crew, but by eliminating the bosses of all bosses, which meant John could be nominated next to take the throne. And that's what ultimately happened. Now you are tossing the guy who protected you, treated you like a brother, and loved you with every inch of his soul. And this is how you repay him. You are purposely throwing Sammy under the bus for the sake of self-preservation. You think what Sammy did to you was sucker shit? What John did to Sammy, um, he's the true enemy here, John Gotti. That's some sucker shit. There's a saying that the fish rots at the head. Honestly, I think at this particular moment, there wasn't anything else that was worthy for Sammy to be loyal to. Again, I don't condone what he did, but I understand. The only bad thing about season 4, as mentioned at the beginning of this, is that it's long. It's gruesome to get through. To combat this, treat it like there is a season 6. Spread them out over several days, and just take your time with it. Now, this is the ugly part of season 4 that I dislike. There is a lot of audio inconsistency. So, for example, where we start with the intro song, it's loud as shit. Now, I'm not complaining about the quality of the production of the song. I actually like the song, but it's really loud. And most times you would actually have to turn it down. Now, after the intro, and you start hearing Sammy talk about, whatever the topic or the subject is, you can barely even hear him. You actually have to turn back up the volume. And this is with me being in a public setting with my earbuds in my ears. Now, when the next episode would kick in, I would completely forgotten that I've turned the volume way up. So I'm hit with this loud intro song, and I'm just like getting a scare of a lifetime. And I look absolutely ridiculous trying to quickly locate my phone to turn down the volume. This didn't happen just once. It was prevalent through season 4 and 5, and it was absolutely annoying. But it's a great intro song. I can't deny that fact. Now, speaking of season 5, let's get into season 5. Season 5 was much slower in comparison to its previous season. However, some stories did stuck out to me. Now, one story stuck out to me. It was one of Sammy's friend who came to him for help to stash something at his house. During this time, Sammy was dead broke, and this was before he even became like an associate. But yeah, he was broke and he owed 2 months of back rent. So Sammy could have made a killing off of whatever was stashed at his house. All he had to do was eliminate that friend. But not all money is good money. His friend came to him for all the right reasons. Sammy was a gangster, but he was a different type of gangster. He admitted that he thought about it of, getting rid of his friend and just keep the product and sell it to make the money. But he shares a story about a time his father returned the money to a bank teller because she paid out too much. Sammy asked his father, "Why don't you just keep it?" His father responded, "Because the banker teller always takes care of us when we come in. Also, she can lose her job." As a young man, that lesson always stuck out with him. He revealed that lesson made him a different type of gangster. someone who has a moral code of ethics to help combat the chaos and destruction that comes with being part of the mafia. Another story that Sammy told relates to how the mafia took care of their community. In season 5, there was a teacher who decided to reach out to Sammy in regards to a group of guys from the neighborhood hanging out after school hours. They were littering and leaving broken glasses on the playground. Now, this was a school for children. Therefore, broken glass on the playground is an ingredient for disaster waiting to happen. Sammy went to talk with those boys, and sure enough, they never came back. Now, there were similar stories, which gave me a newfound respect of gangsters during those days. The young gangsters today, they're like wild cards. I just saw a video on social media the other day of a guy from Chicago. He was at a resting place of an opposition. He was not only dancing on this guy's grave, but he had a shovel in his hand. He proceeded to shovel the dirt up with this, and I guess whoever was holding the phone was recording him doing this. So, yeah, I guess gangsters these days they're wild. They're not like how they were back in the day. Very structured, very respectful, and they stood for something. They weren't the type of guys that would just fall for anything. So, yeah, that's the state of our young people in the trenches these days. Very low morale. Let's get into the bad thing I don't like about season 5. Most of the stories we heard in earlier in season 1, 2, and 3 were repeated. Then another timeline would be introduced to us that was directly linked to that timeline. So it was super annoying because it was short. I felt cheated. I just spent 15 minutes listening to it, and it felt like I just wasted my time. Another thing I've noticed in season 5 is that the main episode pictures were labeled in blue and the segments were labeled in brown. It was much easier to follow because you can quickly identify your main episodes from your smaller segment episodes. This could have been extremely useful at the beginning of season 3 when those segments were actually introduced to us for the first time. I'm sure a lot of us were just as confused as I was, which is why I think they decided to implement them in season 5. But since the last episode was aired in season 5, we haven't actually received anything new from Sammy. So, good implementation, but I think it's a little too late. But hey, you tried. Overall, I think this is a great podcast. There is no question that Sammy is an extremely interesting character. And the life of a mafioso back in those days were fascinating, actually. I'm glad that Sammy didn't take all these stories to his grave. You know, I often wonder what great stories died with Princess Diana. You know, JFK, who was the president of the United States, he got assassinated. Tupac Shakur, Martin Luther King, Marilyn Monroe, Malcolm X, just to name a few. If you have ever listened to Mike Tyson's podcast, there are many great Mike Tyson stories that he reveals with us in his podcast. You know, if I think about all these iconic people I've mentioned, we're still alive and we hear them on podcasts. I wonder what great stories that, never came to light and it just died with them. But yeah, I guess we'll never know. So let's close today's episode. I know today's episode was short because this is part 2 of part 1. Now, I promise I'd like to share a story of my own that ties right into how I felt about Sammy's situation, about him being a rat, being a snitch, so to speak. So I already know everyone's going to be asking, was Sammy in the right for turning informant? I'm going to clarify that I am against a man telling on another man, but this situation is different. And to be honest, I don't know what I would have done in this position. I might say that, yeah, I wouldn't snitch. I'm going to stand 10 toes down, through and through. But you, yes, you watching right now, nor me are in this position to make this call because we don't have that experience. We've never been in that situation. So therefore, it doesn't matter what we say. Until we walk in a person's shoe, to actually have the experience, then we can say what we want to say. But for now, I think it's just we're all just talking out of our asses saying that we wouldn't snitch and shit, but we don't know. Until we're in that situation, then we can speak. But as I sit here and I think about this betrayal, I do feel like Sammy turned on John. It was his way of expressing the hurt he truly felt inside. And as I sit here and think about his this betrayal, it really struck a chord with me. I know what it's like being betrayed by someone you love. I'm going to tell you a storyline about a time in my life. I'm going to start off by saying that this is all public record, and this is the first time any of those involved in this incident had openly spoken about it. All right, here we go. Let me take you back to New Year's Eve of 2008 at a well known restaurant called Logan Corner. Around this time, the food scene wasn't great. So there was only a few good places to eat, and this was one of them. A guy who goes by the name of Tuna, I'm obviously not going to use his real name, entered the restaurant drunk out of his mind, and he was accompanied by a friend with two other girls. I was with one friend and my older sister. So the three of us are at this restaurant. We were there to share a meal and to reflect on our milestones and memories that we shared and built with each other of that year. Before I continue, I'm going on the record for this one. The friend that I was with, no one was actually scared of him. I was his capo. I was with him every day. And I was the reason he walked around in the city in a comfortable manner. Be that as it may, he was a terrific businessman, but he was never a gangster. He was a peaceful guy, actually, and a lot of people know him to be very humbled and likable person, very peaceful guy. He was very well liked by many. Here's a quick summary of the crew because some of them will be in this story. Our crew consisted of about 15 to 20 members. I don't remember so vividly about it, but at that time there was about 15, 20 members. We were doing some pretty heavy stuff, not all the same stuff. Like we were doing this, they were doing that, but whatever. Um, yeah, we were doing some pretty heavy stuff to make some money, but we were quiet. We weren't a gang because we didn't believe in making it easy for law enforcement to identify us. So we didn't call ourselves anything. We didn't drive fancy cars, nor did we wear fancy clothes. We looked like a bunch of regular Joes, to be honest. In simple terms, we didn't look like heat bags. Some of us eventually caught some pretty big charges over the years and went away, did several years. Again, it's all public record, and I'm not dropping any names. They're like me. We're in a different place in our lives. We're not proud of our past, and we're all just trying to move on with our lives. So if you know, you know. But because of this heat, our group ended up splitting into two factions to protect business interests. They were doing more heavier stuff that they can get locked up and do a lot of time. We were doing some pretty big stuff too, but it was sort of like a slap on the wrist during that time. Okay, now we all have kids. Some of us have legitimate business, or we simply just became working family men for the sake of our children. Maybe a few of us had some missteps or two, but we won't get into that. Now, Tuna came storming over to our table and started yelling at my friend. He asked why he tried to mess up his money by trying to take one of his clients that he was currently supplying to. We weren't going to do anything until he started threatening my friend. Of course, I ego challenged him because my friend just sat there and said nothing. And that really didn't sit well with me. We're in a public place. There were people, in the restaurant. I stood up to face him. I don't recall exactly what I said, but it was clear that it wasn't received well because he threw a punch. The next thing I knew, I was in fight mode. I threw a few punches back. My older sister is a scrapper. She's got a reputation for scrapping. Mid-sized Asian girl, but she has a good reputation of throwing hands. So she started to fight one of the girls, and then mid-fight, my brother-in-law walks in, and a whole brawl broke out. Everyone except my friend who stood by watching. Now, I really do feel bad for that restaurant owner, even as I'm talking about it. We were regulars there, and boy, we really trashed that place up good. Now, the owners knew us well enough and could have turned us over to the police, but they're Chinese. They don't deal with cops. So, shout out to the owners for not giving us up. My brother-in-law came back with my older sister another time, offering to pay for the damages. Not only did they refuse the money, but they sat them down and started to serve them as if nothing ever happened. So, the owners of that restaurant, those are some good fucking people. I'm not sure if it's the same owners that run that joint, but they are stand-up people. I really like them for that. Anyways, later I find out that the guy Tuna was referring to was the same guy I sat in a meeting several weeks back. It's funny because I was busy that day. I remember it just like yesterday. I wasn't supposed to be at that meeting, but my friend needed me to go with him to discuss business opportunity with a future potential client. Pretty much begged me to come. So I agreed. I was his capital. Whatever he needed me, I was going to be there for him. I later asked my friend if he knew that guy was with Tuna. He said no. Um, I'm with this guy every day. I love this guy. I know him well. He looked down and completely avoid making eye contact, and that's just like his trademark. So you can't pull a blindfold over me. I knew him well, and he wasn't being honest with his answer. So a few months go by, and I end up at a rave. We were growing some plants at the time. I know you have a good imagination, so I'll let you figure that one out for yourself. Those were the days when, a pound was going for anywhere from 2,500 to 2,800. If you had some really good stuff, it can go for 3,200 a pound. But we did it illegally, and yes, without a license. They weren't even handing out license at this time because a few years later you can actually apply for a license, and I think it can grow like 150 trees or something like that. But this is just to give you an idea of how far back we went in this business. We did it before those licenses were even approved. So we really didn't go out. We stayed low key, away from public eye. But isolation proved to be pretty tough on us. So we decided to let loose, and we ended up at this rave. Now I was popping pills all night. When I left, I decided to go grab some groceries because everyone knew that the next day everything would taste like cardboard. If you know, you know. It's like horrible. You can't sleep, you can't eat. It's terrible. Guess who I run into inside that store? Tuna and two of his associates. Now, I'm going to remind you, I was coming off of that stuff. My mind was very warped and mushed, so I wasn't thinking clearly, and I was way too optimistic. Um, you know, if I wasn't under any influence of anything, the first thing to do was, I'm dolo, not safe, I'm out of here. But that wasn't the case. My mind was really messed up. I also knew I had a loaded shotgun in the trunk of my car. Again, not proud of it, but this is just the life I lived back in those days. This wasn't anything new. Of course, my crew knew I had this thing. If we ever needed it, we would have it. It's like that saying. It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. We had it, but yeah, it was fully loaded and ready to go. If anything were to happen, I was gonna knock their heads off their shoulders. Um, you know, I finished my grocery shopping, still thinking nothing's gonna happen. As I walked to my car, I looked around and I saw nothing alarming. When I opened up the back door to put the bags in the back seat, all three guys came behind. One soccer punched me, and the other started to just throw punches and kicks. Right away, I started to move towards the rear of my car. Now, I had a car that I couldn't just press the button and the trunks would just pop open, right? like how the cars have now. But you just have to like open it manually. So I rushed to the trunk with them still swinging on me, and I think they knew I was trying to reach for the trunk for something. And somehow I lost my footing and ended up on the floor. I covered my face until it was over. He took off running, and I took off after I gathered myself, because I wasn't going to stick around for the cops to show up. After the incident, I remember my brother-in-law came to me to discuss this serious matter. Of course, I wanted to get back. Um, I had it in my trunk. I'm thinking that I could solve my problems, my own problems, but I had to test them. So I responded to him, we're doing big things, which we were. And this is going to bring a lot of heat onto us, and it'll just be bad for business. And I told him, let's leave it alone. Now, all this does make sense, but I also just wanted to see what his thoughts were. He agreed quickly, and that was the end of that discussion. I was disappointed with this result. I wanted to see what his thoughts were. Did my friendship mean anything, or was protecting business interests more important than our friendship? Understand something? When we had any problems back in the day, I was always at the forefront, ready to spring into action at a second notice. I always thought that would be reciprocated, but I learned quite quickly that that wasn't reciprocated. On November the 16th, 2009, my older sister and brother in law, along with two friends, went to go eat at a restaurant. They ran into Tuna, who was also eating at the same restaurant. Now, this is a touchy subject. Tuna was with his family. I'm talking like mom and, well, like the whole nine. Of course, the code in the streets, leave family out of it, deal with them on another day. They initially wasn't going to go after him. I know those guys. I know them like the back of my hand. They would never do that. It's just not like them to do that. But my sister started to yap off and be in their ears. I heard this firsthand from her after when the incident occurred later. But yeah, she told me that she called them pussy, and reminded them whenever there was a problem, I was always at the forefront. Now, my brother needs you guys, no one is standing up for him. And it was after what she said that prompted them to confront him at that restaurant. I didn't expect that they would do that while he was actually with his family. My honest opinion, again, they should have caught him on another day. And I know those guys well, they would never do that. But, if I was Tuna, I would be just as mad. Now, there was a bubble tea spot next door. They left the restaurant and made their way over there after confronting him. But my brother in law had a bad feeling. And I got a phone call, and he says, gather the boys and load up. My friend came to pick us all up. So, yeah, we're all in this car deep. And I come out with my duffel bag. So, the driver, my friend, knows. Whenever he sees that duffel bag, he knows. He knows what time it is. Now, about my friend, he's a very slow driver. He was a slow driver then, and he's still a slow driver now. It's just who he is. I've never seen this guy speed or getting a speeding ticket. So here we are in this car, and he's driving slow. And it really irked me because, like, there's urgency. We got to get there. And I remember vividly screaming at him to fucking drive faster. Now, we were a few blocks out. Then we get a phone call letting us know a few of our guys got stabbed and cut up badly and to abort the journey. Sure enough, we drove a few blocks to the spot and there were heavy police presence. We passed the spot, exit onto the freeway, and headed back downtown. I got really mad at my friend for driving slow that day. I blamed him for our friends getting stabbed because he drove really slow. And I had that thing on me. There wasn't a single thing that they could do. If I came through that door, no one was going to walk out of there. But looking back now, I'm very glad that he drove very slow because I don't think I would be sitting here doing this video. My life would have turned out a lot differently if I walked into that restaurant with that thing on me. He started to blame me for our friends getting stabbed, which actually pissed me off even more because I inherited his beef. This wasn't my problem to begin with, but because I was the one who threw that first punch at that restaurant on New Year's Eve. I was the one responsible for the escalation of many events that led up to where we were. I don't even know how I got there, to be honest. I just remember having dinner on New Year's Eve with a friend and my sister, and that was it. After, when things died down, the guy I've been with every day for years has stopped hanging out with me. I was his capo. He doesn't pick up my calls, nor does he return my calls. Um, and it was during this time I felt betrayed. Mind you, there were people still looking for me, and he's nowhere to be found. He hid the entire time of this war, and I inherited this war, and he just left me. But I guess things worked out. Shortly after that, I found God. I quit the business. I stopped hanging out with that crew. I got a regular job. I changed my address, changed my phone number, and for 5 years, no one knew where I was. I just went to church. I went to work. I came home, slept, and I just rinse and repeated that for 5 years. And as I was growing my faith, eventually I met the woman of my dreams who was still my wife up to this day, for 14 years. So I did a 360 from that event up to now as it's a blessing in disguise because since then a lot of my friends, some are still doing time. I have friends that died very violently, got shot, dead. Another friend got shot. They lit the car on fire so that law enforcement couldn't identify them. Not here, out in Vancouver, but and I have recently have friends that died from drug overdose. Yeah, it was a tough life, but that's not where I am anymore. But I'm telling you this story is because, in closing, betrayal does something to a man. I lived it. I experienced it. You can see the hurt because it's hard for me to talk about. And as a man, sometimes you lose all logic when great treachery strikes. So yeah, Sammy, I don't condone what you did, but I understand. You're still a man's man in my eyes. And yeah, that wraps up today's episode. Thank you for all your continuous support. I know that part two took a while to come out. I was caught up in the middle of something that required my full attention, but we're back and we are ready to rock and roll. Until next time, peace.